Arizona Territory, July 1879. The sun was merciless, the kind that peeled skin from bone and hope from the heart. Faye Hollis gripped the reins tighter, her cracked lips parting in a dry gasp as the skeletal remains of the Army outpost appeared ahead, half-collapsed fencing, two standing cabins, and not a single soul in sight. Her horse, Dusty, staggered beneath her, foam crusting his muzzle. She had been lost for 2 days. Her wagon had splintered in a river crossing, her hired guide swept away before her eyes. She had been on her way to meet her brother in Prescott, hauling the last of her late father's belongings: maps, journals, a worn Colt he never fired again after the war. But now the desert had swallowed everything but her and the mare. "Please," she whispered to the empty outpost, her voice rasping like sandpaper. "Let someone be here." She dismounted, legs trembling, vision blurry. A door creaked, then a voice low, steady. "That horse is near dead. You too, by the look of it." She turned fast, eyes locking onto a tall figure stepping from the shadow of the cabin. He wore a sun-bleached scout's coat, rifle slung over his shoulder, a hat pulled low. His jaw was rough with days of stubble, his eyes a clear steel blue that flicked over her with sharp concern. "I am not here to steal," she said quickly. "I did not say you were." He moved to her side without hesitation, unclasped a tin flask from his belt and held it out. "Drink slow." Faye drank. Water never tasted so sacred. "Name's Harlan Locke," he said as he took the reins of her horse. "Scout for Fort Bowie, or was. They pulled out of this place a year back. I still come through when I range east." She blinked. "I am Faye Hollis from Missouri. I was heading to Prescott." Got turned around. "You are lucky you found this place, Miss Hollis," he said. "Come in, you need shade before anything else." Inside the cabin it was cooler but still dry. A small fire crackled in a hearth, its heat gentle. There was a cot, a few supplies, a saddlebag hanging on a nail. No sign of anyone else. Faye sat on a worn stool, her hands shaking. "How long have you been alone out here?" she asked. Harlan shrugged off his coat, revealing a faded Union shirt beneath. "Long enough to stop counting." He crouched by the fire, tossing on a piece of mesquite. "Storm's coming." "You will stay tonight." She nodded, too tired to argue. Outside, the wind kicked up sand, howling low like a distant cry. That night they shared the fire. Faye sat wrapped in a blanket he gave her. She watched Harlan roast beans in a dented tin pot, his movements quiet, practiced. "Why would you stay out here if the Army left?" she asked softly. He sat back, stretching his long legs. "Not much reason to go back. I scout the old trails, sometimes guide wagon trains. I like the silence. You are not afraid of the loneliness." He looked straight at her, something tired and honest in his eyes. "I was. Then I got used to it, but I do not think anyone ever stops needing people. We just stop expecting them." Faye held his gaze longer than she meant to. Then her eyes went to the flames. "Thank you," she said. "For the fire and the water. You needed help, that is all." But it was not all. She saw how he kept glancing at her, making sure she was warm, that she ate, that the wind outside did not frighten her. And when she began to drift to sleep, curled on the cot with the blanket tucked under her chin, she felt the stillness in the room shift. She opened her eyes to find him sitting near her, not too close, just close enough that if she reached out she could touch his hand. "Are you keeping watch?" she asked. "Old habit," he replied, then after a pause, "And I do not trust this wind," she smiled faintly. "I feel safe." His mouth twitched like he almost smiled too. "Good." The next morning the wind had died. The air felt newer somehow, like the sky had wrung itself out. Harlan fed her horse. Faye helped gather water from his hidden barrel. When she tried to thank him again, he shook his head. "You are not ready to ride yet. Your eyes are still glassy and your hands shake when you hold the canteen. Give it one more day." She nodded. Truth was, she wanted one more day, not just to rest, but because of the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching. Like maybe he had been alone too long. They spent the day repairing her saddle. He showed her how to patch the leather using sinew and patience. She told him about her father's death, the slow way cancer took a man who once rode with Fremont. She talked about her brother, waiting up in the mountains with a mining claim he hoped to turn into something real. Harlan listened. Not with pity, but with real attention. "Your father sounds like a man who would have done the same for you," he said once. "He would have." She hesitated. "But I do not know if he would have lasted out here like you." He glanced out at the desert. "No one really lasts. You just learn to stay upright when it tries to knock you down." That night the fire burned brighter. She sat nearer to him, their knees almost touching. When her fingers brushed his, he did not flinch. His hand turned so their palms met, she swallowed. "You do not talk much, no need most times. Do you ever think about leaving this place?" He looked into the fire a long while, then only once. "And when was that?" He lifted his eyes to hers. "Yesterday. When I saw you coming through the dust, half dead but still holding the reins like hell would not stop you." Her breath caught. She looked down, then back at him. "I thought I was going to die out there," she whispered. "But then you were here." Harlan's voice was low. "You were not alone, Faye, not anymore." She leaned in before she could think better of it. Their lips met slow, careful, like both were still learning what it meant to want again. When they pulled apart, his hand stayed cradling her cheek. "Stay one more night," he said. "I will," she whispered. "Then we ride together." The morning sun pressed hard against the roof of the cabin, drawing heat into the wood until it creaked like it might split. Faye sat on the step, legs folded beneath her skirt, stitching a tear in the saddle blanket with a bit of gut thread Harlan had handed her. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and sweat traced the inside of her arm, but she didn't stop. Inside, Harlan struck flint to kindling. The sound echoed faintly behind her. "You always sew like that?" he asked, stepping out and wiping his palms on his trousers. "Like what?" "Like it owes you something." Faye didn't look up. "It does, my life maybe." He leaned against the post beside her, arms crossed. "That's a heavy debt for a saddle blanket." She tied off the stitch with a sharp tug, then finally met his gaze. "I don't like leaving things to fall apart, even small things." His eyes lingered on her face a second longer than they needed to. Then he nodded once and turned toward the horse corral, where Dusty stood with her head low, tail twitching at flies. "I'll check her hooves," he said. "Won't know what that riverbed did till she walks more." Faye stood and followed him, brushing dust from her skirt. "She's used to hills, not dry country. I should have known better." Most folks don't know what they're riding into till it's too late. They worked side by side without much talk. Harlan crouched beside the mare, lifting each hoof with practiced care while Faye fetched the rasp and brush. When he stood, she handed him the tools without needing to be asked. "You learn horses on your father's land?" he asked. "No," she said, adjusting the cinch on the saddle she'd reassembled. "I learned them from a stable hand named Lorne. My father didn't believe in women riding alone. You ride alone now." "I do a lot of things now." He didn't press. Instead, he walked Dusty in a slow circle, watching her gait. "She's favoring the back right." "Not bad, but I'd give her another day before pushing her west." Faye nodded, brushing a hand along the mare's neck. "Then we stay." They spent the afternoon mending a section of fence that had collapsed. Harlan handed her wooden slats while he hammered them into place with a half-splintered mallet. The sun climbed, then began to fall. Shadows lengthened across the dirt and the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of creosote and something richer mesquite smoke from the fire Harlan had started earlier. When the last nail was sunk, he stepped back and stretched his shoulders. "You don't complain," he said. "I don't see what good it does." He watched her, eyes narrowing a little. "You had a soft life before all this?" "No," she said simply, "just a quieter one." They didn't speak again until evening. The fire had burned low, and the sky outside was streaked with violet. Crickets had begun their song somewhere beyond the fence line. Faye sat on a flat stone near the fire, hands folded in her lap. Harlan stood a few yards away, cleaning the barrel of his rifle with slow, deliberate motions. "You were a soldier," she said. He didn't pause. "Scout. Still means you saw things." His jaw moved slightly, then stilled. "I buried a brother outside of Franklin. That's what I remember most, not the battles, just the dirt." She shifted, her voice quieter. I lost my mother while my father was still away. She got sick and no one came for days. I was 12. Harlan set the rifle aside. You did what you had to. So did you. He came to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him but not touching. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken, something neither of them yet trusted to name. You ever think about settling? She asked. I thought about it once, he said. Had a place picked out near the Gila. But the woman I thought wanted it too, didn't. Faye looked at him steadily. You still want it. He didn't answer at first. Then, not alone. The fire cracked between them. Faye reached for a stick and stirred the embers, watching sparks leap upward. I didn't come west for mining money, she said. Not really. I came because I didn't want to be kept anymore. Every man I knew wanted a woman to stay where he put her. I couldn't breathe like that. You breathe fine out here, Harlan said. I'm learning. He picked up a kettle from the edge of the fire and poured water into a tin cup. The smell of sage and bark tea rose with the steam. He handed it to her without comment. She sipped. You make this often enough. It tastes like smoke and rain. He smiled just once, faint and crooked. That's the desert. They sat like that a long while, drinking from the same cup, passing it back and forth. When her fingers brushed his, he didn't pull away. She didn't ask to share his bedroll that night. She didn't have to. He laid it down beside hers, far enough for modesty, close enough for warmth. Before they lay down, he reached across the narrow space and took her hand. Faye, he said, her name slow and certain. She turned toward him. Yes. His thumb traced the line of her knuckles' rough skin against hers. If you ride west with me, it won't be just to Prescott. I know. You sure you want that? She looked at him fully, her voice even. I want you. He nodded once, then let her hand go, though his eyes stayed on her. They lay down, backs to the fire, faces to each other. Outside, the wind moved through the brush like a whisper they could almost understand. By the third morning, the air had turned. Cooler, clearer. The kind of dawn that promised change without fanfare. Faye woke before the sun breached the low hills. She sat up slowly, brushing grit from her sleeve, and glanced toward Harlan's bedroll. It was empty, the blanket neatly folded and set aside. She found him outside, standing between the fence posts they'd repaired, his back straight, one hand resting on the top rail. You're quiet, she said as she approached. He didn't turn. Coyotes passed through in the night, left tracks by the dry wash. Anything taken? No. Just passing. She leaned her forearms on the rail beside him. The sky was pale gold now, the first rays brushing the far ridge. You thinking about the trail? I am. He shifted, finally glancing her way. We've got enough jerky and beans for 4 days if we ration. I can hunt if we stretch it. I can shoot, she said. I know. They walked the fence line together, silent but easy in their steps. When they reached the lean-to by the corral, he ducked inside and pulled down a rolled canvas from the rafters. She waited, watching a hawk circle far off. You ever guide anyone all the way to Prescott? She asked as he unrolled the canvas onto the dirt. Twice. Both families, one made it, other turned back less than halfway. What stopped them? He tightened the edge of the canvas with a rock. Fear. She crouched beside him, brushing her hand over the hand-drawn map revealed beneath the dust. Rough lines marked ridges and dry creeks, each annotated in faded pencil. How far to the Agua Fria? She asked. 3 days on foot. 2 with strong horses. She traced the route with one finger. We'll need to rest Dusty often. She'll manage if we don't press her. The canvas curled in the heat and he weighted it with a tin cup. You always travel with maps like this? She asked. Only for places I care about. Her hand stilled. She looked up at him, eyes steady. Do you care about this? He didn't answer right away. Then, without shifting his gaze from hers, he said, I do now. They packed in the cool hours before noon. He gave her a worn saddlebag to fill with what she wanted to take. She chose carefully. The compass that had been her father's, a length of cotton for binding wounds, a small tin of lye soap, and the last of the dried apples he'd offered her the night before. At the edge of the outpost where the trail bent westward, Harlan paused, hand resting on Dusty's withers. Faye stood beside him, shading her eyes with her palm. "We'll pass through old ranch land first," he said. "Abandoned, mostly, then canyon country. Not much shelter after that. Then we'll make use of what we find," he nodded, adjusting the strap across his chest. "I'll ride ahead when we reach the pass, make sure the trail's clear." Faye mounted, her skirt gathered neatly over one side of the saddle. "Just don't go so far I can't see you." "I won't." They rode out before the sun reached its height, the outpost shrinking behind them, swallowed by dust and distance. By midday, they reached a dry arroyo lined with brittle brush. Faye dismounted, leading Dusty to a shaded bend where Harlan was already crouched, brushing aside a layer of sand to reveal a shallow pool. "Still water," he said, dipping his canteen. "Won't last long." She knelt beside him, cupped her hands, and drank. The water tasted of stone and old leaves. He watched her, his brow furrowed. "You favor your left side." "Old break," she said, flexing her wrist. "Thrown from a mule when I was 16. Does it still pain you, sometimes?" "Not today," he straightened, handing her the filled canteen. "We'll stop again before dusk. There's a rock shelf a few miles up, good shelter." They pressed on, the trail rising into low hills. The land grew quiet, the wind softer. Ravens circled above, their shadows gliding across the red earth. As they crested a ridge, Faye pulled her horse to a halt. Below them, the land opened wide, flat scrublands stretching toward a distant line of cottonwood trees. "A creek, maybe, or the bones of one. You think anyone's down there?" she asked. He shielded his eyes. "Could be a prospector's camp, could be nothing. Do we avoid it? We stay wide. No need to invite trouble." They made camp beneath the rock shelf he'd mentioned, where a ring of blackened stones marked past fires. Harlan gathered mesquite while Faye laid out their bedrolls side by side. When the fire caught, the light danced over the stone, flickering against the curve of her cheek as she sat cross-legged, slicing a strip of jerky with her knife. "You think your brother's still waiting?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "I hope so. He wrote about a claim near Lynx Creek. Said he'd found color. You trust him?" "With my life." Harlan sat across from her, his rifle resting beside his knee. "Then we'll find him." She studied him in the firelight, and after, he didn't look away. "That's for us to decide." Faye let her hand fall to the edge of the bedroll, fingers brushing the canvas. "I don't want to go back to the way things were." "You won't." "I don't want to lose this either." "You won't lose me." The fire snapped, sending a spark arcing into the dark. He crossed to her then, moving slow, and knelt beside her bedroll. "You've got more grit than most men I rode with," he said, "but you don't have to carry everything alone anymore." She reached for him, threading her fingers through his. "I don't want to." "Not with you." They lay down with the fire low, the stars bright above them. The desert stretched out silent and wide, but that night, neither of them felt alone in it. The fourth morning broke pale and quiet, the kind of stillness that came before heat rose in waves from the ground. Faye woke to the sound of hoofbeats, slow, measured, not near but moving along the ridgeline. She sat up, heart taut, and reached across her bedroll. Harlan was already crouched beside the fire pit, rifle in hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They ain't riding hard," he said, voice low. "How many?" Faye asked, standing and brushing dust from her skirt. "3, maybe 4, keeping their distance." She watched the ridgeline where the shapes of riders moved like shadows against the rock. They didn't descend, didn't call out, just paced along the high edge before one turned and led the others back out of view. "They weren't looking to fight," she murmured. "No," Harlan said, lowering the rifle, "but they saw us, and they'll remember." She didn't ask who they might have been. There were too many answers to that in this part of the territory. All that mattered was that they hadn't come down. They broke camp quickly. Harlan saddled Dusty while Faye folded the bedrolls and tied them down. Neither spoke much, but there was no tension between them, just the kind of focus that knew how fast calm could turn. By late morning, they reached a bluff that overlooked a dry basin. A game trail wound along the edge, narrow and uneven. Harlan dismounted. leading Dusty by the reins. "Too steep to ride," he said. Faye followed without hesitation, boots kicking up pale dust. The sun pressed hard against her shoulders and small stones shifted underfoot. At one point she slipped, catching herself against a scrub cedar. Harlan turned, reached for her wrist. "You all right?" she nodded, breath short. "Just loose footing." He held her gaze a second longer than needed, then helped her across the worst of it before they continued single file along the ledge. When the trail widened again, he handed her a strip of dried venison from his saddlebag and pointed to a shaded overhang. "We'll stop there. Let the horse rest." They shared the venison and a swallow of water, sitting with their backs against the rock. From where they rested, the basin stretched wide and cracked, dotted with greasewood and distant mesquite. Faye pulled her knees up, resting her chin on them. "You ever think about where you'd stay if you didn't have to keep moving?" He pulled a small pouch from inside his coat, cured tobacco and a bit of paper. "There's a spot I know near the Verd. Creek runs year-round, enough grass for a horse. Bit of flat ground for a cabin." She watched him roll a smoke with careful fingers. "Why haven't you gone?" Lighting the end with a coal he'd saved, he shrugged. "Didn't have a reason to." Now she looked at him, eyes steady. "And do you?" He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling toward the stone above them. "I might." They didn't speak again until the heat began to shift. Shadows stretched longer and the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of creosote and something older sun on stone, dry bark, the memory of rain. They descended into the basin by late afternoon, following the path of a dry arroyo. The horse moved slower now and Faye walked beside her, hand resting lightly on the mare's shoulder. "Back legs stiffening," she said. "I saw it," Harlan replied. "There's a spring near the far end of this wash. If it's not dry, we'll stop there tonight." They reached the spring just before dusk, nothing more than a dip in the land where water pooled against a shelf of rock. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Harlan unsaddled the mare while Faye gathered wood from a nearby thicket, careful to check for snakes. They built a small fire, just enough to cook a bit of cornmeal and warm their hands. As the sky turned violet and stars began to blink open, Harlan sat across from her, elbows on his knees, studying her face in the firelight. "You miss the quiet back home?" he asked. There wasn't much quiet. Just a different kind of noise. She broke off a piece of the corn cake, handed it to him. "I think I like this better." He took it, nodding once. "You don't seem like someone who minds the hard way." "I don't," she said, "so long as it leads somewhere." His voice was softer now. "You think it might lead to that creek I mentioned?" She didn't smile, but something in her eyes warmed. "I think if we find my brother and he's all right, I won't need to keep going west." He turned the bit of corn cake in his fingers, then looked up. "I don't want to scout alone anymore." She reached out, her hand closing over his. "You won't have to." Later, after the fire had burned low and the horse slept tethered nearby, they lay side by side beneath the stars. This time, Faye turned toward him first, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "I never thought I'd find someone out here," she murmured. "You didn't just find me," he said. "You stayed." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, her voice no more than breath. "I'm not going anywhere." And in the hush of the desert night, where the only sound was wind through the brush and the quiet hum of life enduring, they held to each other like they'd already begun to belong. By mid-morning the next day, the terrain shifted again, scrub giving way to low pine and the scent of damp bark. Faye rode with her gaze forward, shoulders squared, her body swaying with Dusty's careful steps. Harlan stayed alongside, eyes scanning the slope for movement, though they'd seen no riders since the ridge. "The land's changing," she said. "Must be getting close." He nodded once. "2 more valleys, then the rise to the Prescott Hills. If your brother's where he said he'd be, we'll find the claim by dusk." She adjusted her brim against the sun. "If he's gone, then we check the next ridge. If there's any sign he was there, we'll know what to do." They crested a hill just past noon and found the remnants of an old wagon track winding through the trees. Faye dismounted, crouched beside one of the grooves and brushed away a scatter of pine needles. "Fresh," she said. "Not more than a few days old." Harlan knelt beside her, ran his fingers along the compacted earth. Iron rims. Could be a supply wagon headed back from the mining camps. She straightened slowly, eyes narrowing toward the distant slope. He said he was building a lean-to with a stovepipe. "If we see smoke, we'll follow it." They kept riding, the trees growing thicker, air cooler. Around mid-afternoon, a curl of gray rose ahead, thin and steady. Faye's breath caught in her throat. They found the lean-to tucked beneath a red rock bluff, a stovepipe jutting from a low roof of canvas and pine boughs. A man crouched by the fire, stirring something in a pot. When he turned, Faye slid from the saddle before Dusty had stopped moving. "Micah," the man stood, blinking through the smoke, and his face broke into a stunned grin. "Faye, Lord above Faye," they met halfway, arms thrown around each other, her hat falling to the ground. He smelled of iron and pine and weeks without soap, but she didn't care. He held her like someone who hadn't touched family in too long. "I thought you weren't coming till fall," he said, pulling back to study her face. "What happened?" "I left early," she said. "Got lost the wagon, nearly lost myself." "She didn't," Harlan said, stepping forward. Micah extended a hand. "You the one brought her through?" Harlan took it. "Name's Harlan Locke." "You've got my thanks, Locke. You get her here in one piece. You've done more than most I've met west of the Mississippi." Faye stepped back, brushing wind from her cheek. "You found color," Micah nodded, gesturing toward a nearby slope. "Enough to keep digging. It's not a fortune, but it's steady. I got a second bedroll, and the roof don't leak if you sleep toward the back." She hesitated, then looked to Harlan. "We won't stay long." Micah raised his brows. "You ain't staying. I came to find you, make sure you were all right, but I didn't cross the desert to sleep on dirt and pan for flakes." Harlan glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Faye stepped closer, took his hand. "We've got plans," she said. "Once I knew you were safe, I meant to set down somewhere else." Micah looked between them, then nodded. "Well, suppose I can't fault you. I've been talking to rocks for 2 months. Ain't much of a life." Harlan helped her unsaddle Dusty while Micah fetched coffee from a battered tin. They sat under the lean-to's shade as evening settled, the fire throwing flickers across their faces. Faye listened as her brother talked about the claim, the old army man who'd sold him the rights, the mule that wandered off and never came back. When full dark came, Micah cleared his throat. "You sure you won't stay a few days? I'll cook better tomorrow." Faye smiled gently. "You're doing fine, but we've got a place in mind, a creek near the Verd, grass for the horse, shade for a cabin." Micah looked at her long. "You'll write." She stood, bent to kiss his forehead. "I will." They left at first light. Micah stood at the edge of the clearing as they rode off, one hand raised in farewell. Faye didn't look back until they reached the bend in the trail. When she did, her brother was still standing there, smaller now but solid. The trail east of the mountains was rougher, but Harlan knew it well. They moved slow, stopping often to rest Dusty and check the sky for signs of early summer storms. On the third day, they reached the creek. It wasn't wide, but it ran clean over flat stone, shaded by cottonwoods that bent low over the banks. A hawk circled above, and the air smelled of cool moss and wet grass. Faye dismounted and walked the edge, her boots sinking into soft soil. "This is it?" "It is," Harlan said, tying off the reins. She turned slowly, taking it in, the long stretch of water, the open sky, the hush between the trees. "We could build here," she said, "with a porch. Maybe a second room if we ever need it." He came to stand beside her, arms loose at his sides. "We've got time." That evening they lit their fire just beyond the creek's bend. Harlan unrolled the canvas and set it flat, while Faye laid out the few belongings they still carried. They ate quietly, the fire low, the world still. Afterward, she stood at the edge of the water, watching the moon rise above the trees. Harlan stepped behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You still sure?" he asked. She didn't need to look at him. "I've never been surer." He turned her gently, hands sliding to her waist, and she leaned into him. No words passed between them, only breath and closeness and the soft press of her hand against his chest. When they kissed, it was slow and certain, the kind of meeting that settled something deep. When they lay down under the stars, it was with the steadiness of those who had survived too much to take anything real for granted. They built the cabin by hand. It took weeks. They felled pine, split boards, laid stone from the creek. Harlan carved the window frames in the evenings, and Faye stitched curtains from the last of the muslin she'd packed from Missouri. The porch went up with 4 posts and a roof of bark and pitch. Dusty grazed in the tall grass, her limp fading with time. In the quiet hours, they spoke of things only lovers share, fears carried too long, hopes not dared aloud until now. He told her about the letter he never sent his mother after the war. She told him about the day she buried her father, alone but unbent. They planted a small garden behind the cabin. Faye tended it with steady hands, coaxing beans and squash from the hard earth. Harlan built a smokehouse, then a bench beneath the cottonwood. They slept each night side by side, limbs tangled, breathing the same rhythm. There were no more long silences filled with doubt, only the kind that said everything had already been understood. One morning, when the creek was high with summer runoff and the garden bloomed thick, Faye sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee warming her palms. Harlan came from the trees with a fresh-cut bundle of pine slung over his shoulder. He dropped it near the woodpile, crossed the yard, and knelt beside her. "You ever regret it?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes soft. "What, riding west? Losing the wagon?" "Coming here?" Faye leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his. Not one breath of it. He smiled at that quiet, real, and kissed her. And that was the life they built. Not easy, not without hard days, but steady and full. A cabin by the creek, a horse in the grass. 2 people who had once been lost, now found in each other.